Minimaps are shit. They're shit because you make these multi-million-dollar games and people play them staring at these little dots. Games today almost all have minimaps, and we lean on them for so much. Lots of people love minimaps because they make games accessible to more people who might not be great at navigation or who have limited time. Others hate them because they make games too easy and destroy immersion and storytelling. But what I found when I looked into it is that the importance of minimaps is actually much bigger than games. We use minimaps almost every day in our real-world lives. We get directions and arrows, we find important locations, we navigate without ever needing to look at the environment. Hell, people can navigate right off cliffs because something in our brains shut off when we use a minimap. I decided I'd go back and see how we got here. I wanted to know, when did we start using minimaps and how did they get so complex? In games, how much are we just playing the minimap? And in our real lives, how much are we actually paying attention to where we live and not just following blips on our devices? So let's dive in to see what I found out. Starting off, the earliest games that required directions, adventure games like Colossal Cave Adventure and Zork, made you make your own maps. These big, multi-screen adventures were complicated and you had to keep track yourself. Otherwise, other kinds of games at the time, arcade games especially, tended to take place on one screen at a time. In Asteroids and Pac-Man and Space Invaders, you see everything on a single screen that can mess you up. You see threats and you deal with them. But then, along came Battlezone. Aside from this game being insanely awesome with 3D line graphics in 1980, it had a 360-degree world. So you couldn't see everything. And along with this came what's generally seen as the first minimap. It's simple. It's a radar system. You have to watch the radar up top for blips and turn and destroy your enemies. You can't just spin randomly or hope for the best. You have to flick your eyes between the radar above and the big screen below, and this actually adds a lot of tension to the game. Can you find the enemy fast enough? Are you alert enough? It might be simple, but this minimap made it possible to have a fast-paced 360-degree game that wasn't impossible to play. Now, the other earliest genre to incorporate a minimap was racing. This actually seems really natural. In racing, you need to have a close view on your own car, but you also need to have some information about the track or where other cars are. In real life, you'd get this through radio or signaling, and from the earliest days, this was done with a minimap. Here's Rally X, 1980. It's not pretty, and you don't actually see the track itself, but the core idea that still exists in racing games today is there. There's the positions of the other cars, and the minimap space represents the grid of streets. Again, there's this idea of tracking a screen bigger than the playable one, and in doing so you make the game more fast-paced and more exciting. For racing, the minimap has gotten more complex over the years, but the concept is the same. Show the racetrack and show the other racers. Now, aside from Battlezone and Rally X, the other big first minimap was Defender 1981. Defender had a playable area way bigger than the screen. It basically exploded the horizontal shoot-'em-up genre, and still today is one of the highest moneymakers ever made in arcade games. And it was hard, famously hard. The minimap here at the top is one of the things that actually makes the game playable. The enemies come thick and fast from all directions, and you need to have some kind of warning or guidance system. And with Defender, you also get a preview of the terrain. So we're already seeing the minimap expanding from just showing enemies to showing an actual game map in miniature. Now, through the rest of the 80s, we get more minimaps in these genres. Here are a few that use a few different kinds of variations, but that are still in action or racing or these kinds of things. I think the next genre to start finding the minimap was adventure, and sort of bleeding into that, RPG. Maybe it was Gates of Dawn, the 1985 Commodore 64 game that was the first adventure game to have a minimap up here in the top corner. It's also simple, like a checkerboard, but you can orient yourself, your path, and the room you're in, and man, does it ever help. Without this, it's such a confusing mess of different screens. But when Zelda hit in 1986, I think the concept went mainstream. Instead of the old way where users had to make their own maps, in Zelda, Link picks up dungeon maps. And when he does, this little minimap of grid cells appear, and now you're not totally lost in the dungeon. Again, a simple thing, but it lets us play an action-based, multi-screen RPG game without the frustration of pausing or being lost all the time. So at this point, by the mid to late 80s, we have arcade, racing, adventure, and RPG games all having minimaps. And right now, they're making games faster, less frustrating, and bigger than they could be otherwise. Now, it might seem that that's basically the minimap, and now it's just visual improvements, but no way, we're just getting started. With Herzog's Zwei, 1989, and later Utopia in 91, and Dune 2 in 92, the real-time strategy genre was born and grabbed a top spot in gaming. Even in Herzog's Zwei, we see the minimap appear. And by Dune 2, the core functionality of pretty much all RTS minimaps is there. Seeing enemies and allies as dots, moving quickly around a map by clicking, exploration, seeing terrain and resources. Things that would be added in the coming years are things like fog of war as well, and other types of radar systems. Now, RTS games are fundamentally played on a literal map, so a minimap kind of seems like overkill, but it's super useful. Other types of strategy games, like SimCity and Civilization, also picked up these minimaps, and they added all kinds of filters over the years and different views. And then as the RTS genre itself evolved with titles like Command & Conquer, Age of Empires, StarCraft, and Warcraft, well, the minimap remained a core feature. Today, these kind of games have minimaps all the time, and they have so many filters and views and all kinds of useful functionality. Now, an interesting one in the 90s as well is first-person shooters. Through most of the 90s, FPS games did not have minimaps. Now, I think this was a conscious choice to try not to give the player too much information about terrain or enemies. In Wolfenstein, Doom, Quake, and Half-Life, none of them came with a minimap. But then, Counterstrike landed. Originally just a mod on Half-Life, this was, I think, where the radar-based minimap collided with the strategic minimap and gave us the one we all expect in FPS games nowadays. Halo came after this with its own radar system, and then there was a whole host of others, like Medal of Honor, Battlefield 1942, and Metal Gear Solid. And with this, we started to expect minimaps in our first-person shooters. But I think where we really got hooked on minimaps is Grand Theft Auto. Early Grand Theft Auto games didn't even have a minimap. Actually, Grand Theft Auto 2 looks almost like a full-screen overhead minimap with its view. But in 2001, when Grand Theft Auto 3 came out and introduced its minimap, it was instantly the most important tool in the game. The map of streets, points of interest, shops, police, enemies, they all told you such a wealth of information that trying to play without this minimap would have been a major handicap. It did make the game more fast-paced, more exciting, more anticipatory. But at the same time, it started to take your eyes off the big screen in front of you, off the canvas that the developers were working so hard to create. So I think from GTA onward, we start to enter into an era where the value of the minimap gets so high that it actually becomes a serious question whether we're spending more time looking at the minimap or the game. For genres where immersion is really important, this was a problem. This especially comes up in adventure, RPG, or horror. Horror games almost always avoid minimaps because they tend to give too much information to the user and ruin surprises. RPGs are a little bit similar. Ocarina of Time, for instance, had dungeon minimaps, but they were very minimalistic, so you still had to solve puzzles. The thing is, when you as the player have access to a ton of information in the game world that your character doesn't have, that can also break immersion. In original WoW, for instance, this was fairly limited, but it's exploded over the years, so now you can just run around and you know where everything is. You don't need to explore, ask in-game characters, or get to know a map. You just run right to what you need. Games grow easier and more convenient, but you're less in the game world. You're not asking anything. It's a tough balance because we want convenience, but we also want to feel like we're actually deep in the game. Strangely enough, this is paralleled in real life. Studies show that bus drivers in London actually use less of their brains compared to cab drivers. That's because bus drivers follow a predetermined route every day. They don't have to actively try to navigate across the city, recognize new landmarks, or explore. On the other hand, cab drivers are always finding new routes to new places, navigating through a changing world. However, and this is where minimaps come in, when cab drivers start to use GPS devices, that area of the frontal cortex that they were using for exploration turns off. When we have written instructions to get to a friend's house, instead of an address we enter into GPS, the instructions are usually descriptive. Like, turn right at the stop sign, then just past the big white house on the left there's an alley, go till you find the red trash can with the painting of Jimi Hendrix. That kind of instruction means you have to pay close attention and notice things in your environment. And by the way, it sounds like the kinds of instructions you used to get in RPGs like Morrowind and early World of Warcraft. As you get to know a place in reality or in a game, your brain constructs an imaginary version of it in your mind. That's how navigation works. The more you navigate, the more accurate your mental model becomes, lining up closer and closer with reality until you know a place and can see it in your head. At that point, you and the place are one. With constant GPS on Minimaps, however, this process never gets started. You don't need to notice cross streets or strange features or anything. You just need to know when to turn right and find a parking spot. As a result, our brains don't create that mental environment, and we don't do the work to check if we're going the right way. That's why people can follow navigation systems into empty fields or right off of cliffs. And it's not like developers weren't aware of this. At Bethesda, they experimented trying to find a balance between convenience and immersion. Morrowind brought in a tiny minimap, but it didn't have much information on it, just an actual map in miniature. People were still getting lost. So in Oblivion and then later Skyrim, they opted for a quest compass. This shows you the direction you have to go and some points of interest, but it doesn't stick it all directly on an overhead map. But the thing is, this quest compass is not much different than a big arrow saying where you should go. You don't have to pay attention to the world or instructions. So slowly, bit by bit, all those instructions were removed from quest text because the writers knew you weren't going to use them anyway. You were just going to run at the quest compass until you got somewhere. On the other hand, you'd actually get there, and you wouldn't have to read the quest text 1,000 times and spend an hour wandering around a city. In the end, up till now at least, across basically every genre, convenience has won. And so as we move through the 2000s and into the 2010s and beyond, minimaps basically became a part of every game. They're so deeply featured now, and there's more examples than I can even show. Some are well designed, some are awful, but they're definitely ubiquitous. Games like Grand Theft Auto 4, Witcher 3, Modern WoW, Baldur's Gate, these have minimaps so detailed that you can play almost just by watching the map. I mean, look at this guy playing Borderlands with just his minimap showing. The thing is, at the same time, in real life we've got worse with navigation because we're so used to using the minimaps on our phones. We're not used to figuring out directions, so the trend is just going to accelerate. Now, developers have pushed back now and again. Peter Molyneux said, "Minimaps are shit. They're shit because you make these multi-million-dollar games and people play them staring at these little dots." And judging by the number of YouTube videos and Reddit threads, it's not an unpopular opinion. So we got this subgenre of games that deliberately don't have minimaps. Souls games are the peak example here. You might have a general map or not, but you don't have aids like radar, and it makes the game more immersive, more challenging. In a way, removing the minimap now has the same effect that adding it did back in '81. It actually makes a game feel bigger and more difficult. Now, Elden Ring did add a quest compass, so we can see the trend just keeps continuing, but then we have Souls-like games like Black Myth Wukong, and there's nothing like that. So it's back and forth in that genre. Developers are also adding options to turn off the minimap, like in Breath of the Wild. But that's a hard choice because you have to deliberately hobble yourself in the game. In the same way, it's difficult to hobble yourself in real life. It's pretty likely that when you use a minimap to get around your city, you're paying less attention. You don't build that environment in your head, you don't see the little details of the world we live in, but you do get where you're trying to go. So then, what's more important, immersion, being in the moment, or achieving your goals and getting something done in a reasonable amount of time? Now that's a question for every person, and it might just depend on what you're doing. I don't think anyone back in the 80s realized how much minimap designs would meet up with our everyday lives. But while my knee-jerk reaction is to say that the minimap is gone too far, I'm actually not sure whether it's bad or good. There's no real answer here. Every way forward has some drawback. So, what about you? Are you a minimap hater or a minimap enjoyer? Do you ever turn off your GPS and take things slow or get lost a little? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed following me on my journey through minimap history, and the next time that you see one in a game, I hope you can understand how we got here, and maybe some of you even have some ideas for what we can do next. Thanks for watching.